Welcome to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 120 of the podcast. And in this edition of the podcast, I'm talking about the Chicago Bulls naming Billy Donovan as their next head coach. Donovan has a 243 and 157 record in 5 seasons coaching in the NBA with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And this past year, he won Coach of the Year and led a Thunder team that most people thought wouldn't make the postseason to a 44 and 28 record. I think this is a great hire for the Chicago Bulls to get back to respectability, and I think there are a lot of other teams that should have hired Billy Donovan, but I'll get to that in a bit. And I think the Bulls are not without talent. They have Zach LaVine. Listen, I don't think Zach LaVine is a great talent, but he is a decent enough scorer. He's proven he's more than just that guy who can win the dunk contest. Then they have Lauri Markkanen, who seems like he could be a promising player in the NBA if he could just stay on the court. And then you have Otto Porter Jr., who is a decent enough two-way player when healthy. I get that Otto Porter Jr. has a bad contract, kind of, because he was given a lot of money from the Washington Wizards. But I think when healthy, he's a decent enough player. I think those are 3 players Billy Donovan and the Chicago Bulls can build on. But last year was basically the entire team just watching Zach LaVine put up numbers. I think the Billy Donovan hire is a great way to go because it will turn this team into an actual basketball team. I think last year in particular, Donovan proved he can get stuff out of players that you didn't see coming. Dennis Schroeder was a legitimate 6th Man of the Year candidate because of how good he was with the Oklahoma City Thunder. The beginning of last year, I was basically done with Dennis Schroeder's career in basketball. I thought this guy is who he is. He's going to miss a lot of shots and he can't be part of a winning basketball team. Then Billy Donovan basically turned his career around, and that guy is one of the better 6 mans for the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's what a guy like Billy Donovan can do for a career. Like, for instance, if the Chicago Bulls keep Chris Dunn on their roster, maybe Billy Donovan can turn him into a respectable NBA talent. The Bulls also have a really good big man in Wendell Carter Jr. The guy is like a walking double-double. This team is not without talent, and with Billy Donovan now as their head coach, they should be able to get to a respectable level. Next year, I'm expecting the Chicago Bulls to be at least a 500 team competing for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, and I think that's what you're getting when you bring in a guy like Billy Donovan. And listen, we just watched a documentary about the glory days of the Chicago Bulls, and since Michael Jordan retired, they've had ups and downs throughout that time period. They've had Tom Thibodeau. They've gone to the playoffs with Derrick Rose. They've at least competed, but every so often they fall off the wagon. I think bringing in a guy like Billy Donovan will bring consistency to an organization that desperately needs it. They need Billy Donovan to turn this organization around, and I think he's the type of head coach that can do it. Maybe I'm giving too much credit to a guy who's coached Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, but what I saw with the Oklahoma City Thunder last year was the best coaching job in the NBA last year. Nobody expected the Oklahoma City Thunder to be that good of a basketball team. He was able to get a great season out of Chris Paul and develop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander into a legitimate star player. He's not a superstar player, but Billy Donovan coached that kid up and coached that team up to a better team than they had any right to be. I mean, basically all of their best players were guards. They had Chris Paul, they had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and they had Dennis Schroeder, and yet they were able to almost take out the Houston Rockets out of the postseason. That's how good a job Billy Donovan did with that team. This will be the first time he's walking into an organization without a superstar player. I mean, when he did go to the Oklahoma City Thunder, they had Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. Then he had Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Then that was over, and he had Chris Paul. Now, Chris Paul wasn't the Chris Paul of old, but he still lived up to the billing. This will be the first time Billy Donovan is a part of a fully rebuilt team. Yes, he has Zach LaVine, but that guy is not on the level of those other players I just listed. But I think Billy Donovan can get the job done. I think he's an underrated coach. No, he's not Greg Popovich. He's not immediately going to turn the Chicago Bulls into a championship level team, but that's not what the Chicago Bulls need. The Chicago Bulls need to get back to a respectable level where they can become a consistent consistent organization and at least compete for the playoffs year in and year out. Another reason I think this is a great hire for the Chicago Bulls is because there are other NBA teams that should have wanted Billy Donovan as their next head coach. Here are the teams that come to mind. The Nets. Yes, they just got Steve Nash, but come on, a rookie head coach to go along with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I think Billy Donovan would have been the perfect hire here. He already coached Kevin Durant. He's already had success with Kevin Durant. That would have been a really good hire for the Nets team. Again, the Nets, I've already said this on a past podcast. They've done this before. They brought in Jason Kidd. Maybe it was time for them to bring in a coach who has NBA experience, and Billy Donovan has that. Another team that should have considered hiring Billy Donovan, the 76ers. Come on, you have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. You're trying to get that duo to work. I think Billy Donovan has done a really good job of his star players turning into duos. I think Russell Westbrook and Paul George turned into a really good duo. They had good chemistry till the end. And guess what? Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander turned into a decent NBA duo. I think Billy Donovan could have turned Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid into a decent enough NBA duo. And oh, by the way, he coached Al Horford in college. So maybe he would have been able to turn around Horford's career with the Sixers, which, oh, by the way, was really bad last season. So yes, I think the Philadelphia 76ers should have legitimately gone after a guy like Billy Donovan. Another team, the New Orleans Pelicans. You have Zion Williamson. You have guys like JJ Redick and Drew Holiday. Bring in a guy like Billy Donovan who has a winning track record. You just got rid of Alvin Gentry, who, oh, by the way, doesn't have a great winning track record like Billy Donovan does. I think Billy Donovan could turn the New Orleans Pelicans into a winning franchise. I thought that would have been a really good hire for the Pelicans. You have Zion Williamson. You're probably going to move on from Lonzo Ball, but if anybody was going to get something out of Lonzo Ball, I think it would be Billy Donovan, like he was able to get something out of Dennis Schroeder. Again, I didn't think very highly of Dennis Schroeder, and then Billy Donovan turned his career around. Maybe Billy Donovan could have done the exact same thing for a guy like Lonzo Ball. It would have been a really good hire for a team on the rise to bring in a guy like Billy Donovan. And the last team that comes to mind is the Indiana Pacers. I thought this was a no-brain type of hire for the Pacers. They have Oladipo, they have Malcolm Brogdon, they have Sabonis, who Billy Donovan coached in Oklahoma City. I thought this would have been the perfect hire for a team like the Pacers. Again, he's going to turn that team into a consistent contender. I think he's going to do that with the Chicago Bulls, and I thought he could have done that with the Indiana Pacers. I don't think Billy Donovan would have turned the Indiana Pacers into a championship caliber team, but I think he would have them at least live up to their expectations. And that's what these kind of teams need. The Nets, the Sixers, the Pacers, and the Pelicans need to start living up to expectations. And I think Billy Donovan is the type of head coach that can deliver on those expectations. Instead, the Indiana Pacers are probably going to go after Mike D'Antoni, who is a really good head coach. He's had success with the Sixers. He's been with the Knicks. He's been with the Lakers. He's been with the Rockets. He's been everywhere in the NBA, and he's basically had a lot of offensive success. But Mike D'Antoni can only get you so far, and it seems like when Mike D'Antoni coaches your team, they don't end up living up to expectations. I think Billy Donovan is the type of head coach who can exceed expectations with the team, and I think Mike D'Antoni right now is the type of coach who doesn't live up to those expectations. He had James Harden and Russell Westbrook on his basketball team, two former MVPs, and he wasn't able to get out of the second round. Yes, he faced the Lakers team, but still the Houston Rockets should have had a better regular season than they had. I'm done with the Mike D'Antoni as my new hire. I've seen it. I've done that. This is Billy Donovan's only his second team. I think it would have been a way better hire for a team like the Pacers to go after Donovan than to search for a guy like Mike D'Antoni. Yes, he's an offensive genius. Yes, he turned Steve Nash and James Harden into two of the best guards I've ever seen, but what does that end up resulting in for wins for your franchise? None of his teams have won the NBA championship, and I don't think any of them will. I at least think there's a distinct possibility that Billy Donovan can coach an NBA championship caliber team. I don't have that same faith in Mike D'Antoni. Again, I've seen it. I've done that. He's been there. He doesn't win the championships, and his team doesn't play defense. The Oklahoma City Thunder, with Billy Donovan always played defense. That's the type of head coach I want coaching my team moving forward. And that's why the Indiana Pacers should have gone after Billy Donovan, and why I think it's a huge win for the Chicago Bulls to get Billy Donovan as their next head coach. I mean, since the Bulls moved on from Tom Thibodeau, their last two head coaches have been Fred Hoiberg and Jim Boylen. They're not exactly Phil Jackson level hires. I mean, Fred Hoiberg never lived up to the hype of being a great college coach who would turn into something great in the NBA. I mean, the guy just complained about Isaiah Thomas double dribbling. That's what Fred Hoiberg is most famous for. And it seems like Jim Boylen didn't get along with any member of the Chicago Bulls last season. And again, they shouldn't be as bad as they are. Yes, they don't have a lot of great talent on their team, but they do have some. Again, they have Zach LaVine, they have Wendell Carter Jr., they have Lauri Markkanen, they have Otto Porter Jr. The Chicago Bulls should at least have been a team that looked like they were trying hard every single game, and they didn't do that last year, most likely because they weren't getting along with their head coach. It seems like Billy Donovan is the type of guy who will be able to exceed expectations with the Chicago Bulls. So if you think the Chicago Bulls are like a 30-win team, I think Billy Donovan can turn them into a 40-win team. That's how highly I think of Billy Donovan. Again, I don't think he's the best head coach in the NBA, but he's definitely top 5 at this point. I think for the most part, Billy Donovan has exceeded expectations each and every year he coached the Oklahoma City Thunder. He lost Kevin Durant, and then he turned Russell Westbrook into the MVP of the league. He at least knew how to win basketball games. Those other guys, those other hires for the Chicago Bulls didn't know how to win basketball games. Not Fred Hoiberg, and certainly not Jim Boylen. This is a step in the right direction for the Chicago Bulls. And again, it would be great for the NBA to have the Chicago Bulls be a respectable team. It's better for the NBA when the Celtics, Lakers, Bulls, and Knicks are really great franchises, because when I think of the NBA, those are the franchises I think of. Those are teams that have won championships, and they are the most famous teams in all of basketball. The NBA needs the Chicago Bulls to be a really good team because it's one of their biggest markets in the sport. It's the place where Michael Jordan rose to fame. It had Scottie Pippen, it had Jimmy Butler, it had Derrick Rose. When you think of the Chicago Bulls, you think of winning. And over these past 2 decades or so, there haven't been a lot of winning on that team. And I have faith in Billy Donovan to turn it around. Also, what I love about this hire is it just makes sense from a basketball standpoint. This isn't the splashy hire. I don't think a lot of basketball fans are that into Billy Donovan as a head coach, but what he does with his teams is he exceeds expectations, and that's exactly what he's going to do with the Chicago Bulls. The Nets always seem to go with a splashy hire. The Knicks always seem to go with a splashy hire. They just hired Tom Thibodeau because he's a name. What Tom Thibodeau did with the Minnesota Timberwolves, for me, is unforgivable, and a guy like Billy Donovan is a better hire for the Bulls than Thibodeau is for the Knicks. This hire makes sense. It's not a splashy hire. It's not the Nets going for Steve Nash. This is the right move basketball-wise for this franchise to move in the right direction. It has to be about improving as a basketball team, not making splashy hires so that you get on the front page. This is about the Chicago Bulls becoming a consistent franchise moving forward and seeing what you have in these guys. You have to see if you want Zach LaVine to be your best player on a winning basketball team. I have questions about that, but I have faith that Billy Donovan is going to find the answers. Now I feel like the Chicago Bulls are headed towards the right direction, and that's when a franchise is going in the wrong direction. They have to make a hire that will make you feel like they're going in the right one, and that's what this hire is. I think the interesting thing about Billy Donovan is that he came out of college, he won 2 NCAA championships, and he's, for the most part, lived up to the hype as being a really good to great coach in the NBA. The same with Brad Stevens. These guys have turned out to be really good NBA head coaches. I think the NBA should hire more guys out of college who have had success. And it's not about making a splashy hire when you do that, like the Cleveland Cavaliers tried to do that with John Beilein. It's not about getting that type of guy. It's not about getting Coach K. It's not about getting Tom Izzo to be the head coach of your basketball team. It's about getting a young enough guy out of college to help turn your organization around. And that's what Billy Donovan and Brad Stevens did. They were able to become as consistent of head coaches as they were in college. They have become two of the most consistent head coaches in the NBA. Their teams do not have losing records, and they always put in the effort. People seem to forget that Billy Donovan once upon a time had a 3-1 lead on the Golden State Warriors. He's competed with the dynasties of our time. He's an underrated head coach. This hire is a no-brainer. I couldn't even understand if people were mad about this hire. I don't think that they are, but I think it's the under the radar. It's the best coaching hire of this offseason by far. Again, Nets with the Nash is about the splash, and it's about pleasing Kevin Durant, and it's about pleasing Kyrie Irving. This is a hire that's all about basketball. So in the end, it will probably end up working for the Chicago Bulls, because last year Donovan kind of proved that he can be part of a team that's basically rebuilding and still be able to compete for basketball games. And that's been the issue with the Chicago Bulls ever since Thibodeau left, and the issues with Derrick Rose is that they've been kind of half in on developing young players and half in on competing. Remember that year that they had Jimmy Butler, Dwayne Wade, Rondo, and a bunch of young guys? That was a huge mistake. And I don't think that type of mistake will happen with Billy Donovan, because it seemed like all of his veteran players in the Oklahoma City Thunder were on board with developing a guy like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander while also trying to compete for a playoff spot. There is a way to have best of both worlds, where you can be a team competing in the playoffs and a team rebuilding at the same time. And Billy Donovan feels like a guy who's found the way to do both of those things at a very high level. I also think it's a bit of a mistake for the Thunder to move on from Donovan, because he basically proved he can do both of those things. I think what's interesting with the Chicago Bulls is that there is a lack of a star player on that team, and Chris Paul is probably going to be traded from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Should the Chicago Bulls pursue a guy like Chris Paul? Absolutely yes, because I don't think Chris Paul would have had that type of season with any other head coach in the NBA. Billy Donovan got the absolute best out of Chris Paul. Everyone thought there was not much left in the tank for Chris Paul, and Billy Donovan basically revitalized his career and made him a guy that most teams want to trade for. And it should be Billy Donovan's Bulls that tried to trade for Chris Paul to go along with Levine, Carter Jr., and Markkanen. As I've said, this is the best move the Chicago Bulls could have done. It gets them back to a respectable level. You now have faith in where the Chicago Bulls are headed. Even if you don't like their roster right now, you know that Billy Donovan is the right hire for this team moving forward. They can rebuild and they can compete at the same time, and they can become consistent. It's not about having this one-year run where you win 50 games and maybe you get to a conference finals. It's about becoming a consistent organization, and so far throughout his career, Billy Donovan has proven he is one of the most consistent head coaches in the NBA, and I think that's all you can ask for from a guy like Billy Donovan. This doesn't promise you an NBA championship, but it does promise you that you're headed towards the right direction, and that's what the Bulls need. The Bulls need to become a respectful organization in basketball, because last year they were a complete mess. They basically just watched Zach LaVine score 25 a night and didn't compete hard enough for a young team. This team needs to head towards the right direction, and Billy Donovan will bring them there, in my opinion. I think this is the best coaching hire the Chicago Bulls could have done. The minute he parted ways with the Oklahoma City Thunder, I thought so many teams should have pursued Billy Donovan as their next head coach, and it's the Chicago Bulls who, in my opinion, are the big winners. They get Billy Donovan as their next head coach, and now they can compete for a playoff spot year in and year out. That's how good I feel about this hire. Maybe I'll end up being proven wrong, and maybe Billy Donovan isn't as great as I think he is. But until I am, I think this is the best coaching hire of this offseason by far. Get a guy who's been there before, who can turn your organization around. Don't make the splashy hire. Hire Billy Donovan, and that's exactly what the Chicago Bulls did, and that's why, for the first time in a long time, time. I have faith in the Chicago Bulls to have a decent season next year in the NBA. Look out for Billy Donovan and the Chicago Bulls. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Head to Head Podcast. I'm Cam McKinney. There'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, so please rate, review, and subscribe.